You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Totally Drunk, and tonight on episode 79, we'll be discussing the latest in Overwatch League news, the ongoing streaks of the Overwatch League Elite. We got Stage 2, a Week 5 Fallout, and we'll get you primed for the Stage 2 playoffs, which are set to get underway this week. But before we can get into the news and introduce you to my co-hosts, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who is hanging out with us tonight on Twitch for our live show, and of course thank all of our repeat listeners out there. So as you can tell, it is a two-man crew yet again. My soulmate is out celebrating his anniversary. He's in Maui, he's doing better things than podcasting with us nerds. So he's having a good time there. He's not here to mourn Soul's lack of being in the playoffs. So feels bad, man. But I guess turnaround is fair play. Dallas made it in. Soul is out. It was bittersweet. But you know what? I'm happy for Dallas. I'm happy that they finally made it. They don't have to have like the 4-3 burden of having, being the only 4-3 team to not make the playoffs like it was last stage. So outside of that, it's been a pretty good week, but I'm joined tonight by Spider. Spider, how's this past week been treating you?
It's been pretty good. I mean, the Fuel made it to the playoffs, so that's awesome. I mean, we didn't have to do any shenanigans or anything like that. All we had to do was beat Florida, and we somehow managed that. If you watched the game, it was
a hard task.
It was harder than I expected it to be, but they pulled it out. Florida looked better than what they have been, and we'll talk about Florida more. But Dallas, I don't know. Dallas, for some reason, they're like the team that always plays to the other team's level, unless it's like an upper echelon team, and then they just lose. And speaking of which, we made it to the playoffs, which is awesome. But then we will probably not make it much further than that because we drew the Vancouver Titans in the first round. So Dallas Fuel officially Team USA at this point, drawing the hardest opponent. But other than that, pretty good. The event is wrapping up, so I knocked out all the loot boxes for that. And then I did like a final round tonight and got all the skins and stuff I needed. Like I actually didn't get a legendary skin until Saturday. And I've been doing loot boxes every week. Like I've been doing like 9 plus, whatever else I get. And I've just had terrible luck. But somehow I managed to get like 7 legendaries and like 8 loot boxes. So I guess it all came together in the end. What about you, man? How was your past week?
It's been pretty good. I've been really busy at work, unfortunately. So it's kind of like cut into my event time. I too have not gotten any legendary skins from this event, so that feels bad, man. And I'm probably not gonna hop on after because I gotta do a little bit of spring cleaning with Overwatch Recall after we're done with this recording. But it was a good week. We obviously Game of Thrones is still going on, which definitely impacted my Overwatch League viewership. So go figure. Like I was like, okay, Dynasty are playing tonight. They have the 6:30 p.m. start Central Time. Chances are I'd be able to catch the first 3 maps as per usual every Sunday, right? Nope. So we start out of the gate, and already, we don't start on time. There were some tech issues early on, another game went to a map 5, and then sure enough, Game of Thrones time rolls around, and the Dynasty game hasn't even started yet, so I was like, well, shit. Now what am I gonna do? Because I either way, chances are I would have had something spoiled, so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna turn off my phone, watch Game of Thrones, watch a game after. And sure enough, Hanzhou beat Seoul 3-1.
You held off the disappointment for disappointment.
Basically.
Yeah, that I mean that was a good game. Like 3-1 doesn't really do that game justice. Like Seoul had some issues, but it was a close 3-1.
It
Um,
was. But Spark are another team that I've really kept a close eye on, and they've had a lot of ups and downs. And I'm just happy, at least for the dynasty. We're at this point now where we know who we're actually starting now. I know there's still a lot of people like, well, what's the situation gonna be with Fisher and Fleta now that they're not playing? I mean, for Fleta, that's outside of the upcoming All-Star game because he's starting in that. So he got that buffer, as did Pine from New York Excelsior. But we'll talk about the All Stars in just a little bit. Let's go ahead and jump into this week's news. So first up, looking at the LA Valiant. Something that I don't have in the notes is they do have a new sponsor, in Kit Kat, and I know they're partnering for like the LA Rivalry Week or whatever the heck they were calling it. So.
yeah, basically.
There's that. But outside of that, they also parted ways with one of their assistant coaches in Donzu. Now, this is a second departure from this team's coaching staff this season. And this was one of their acquisitions during the offseason. He was signed along with Peck and 10. And at the time, they were both working underneath Coach Moon. And of course, after the 0-7 start for the Valiant, they got rid of Moon. Peck and 10 basically stepped in as an interim head coach. But you had Donzu on this team, and we have seen some steady improvements from the LA Valiant throughout Stage 2. And, there's been a little bit of experimentation going on with this team. They basically took Kareev off of the Zarya role. We got to see a lot more KSF, and he's been looking... I'd say a lot better than what we got to see out of him during the inaugural season. Granted, that wasn't a lot of playtime overall. But, we've seen some swaps between Izayaki and Kareev on that flex support role. And, in some instances, looking back at last week when they were facing the Dynasty, they were getting some key picks on, Ryuji Han, which really set them up. 4-cent map 5. And they're at the point now where... they finished with a better record than a lot of us were expecting after that rough start, and they seem to be kind of on an uptick. But when it comes to this departure in particular, do you feel like they are trying to maybe steer clear of running that more Korean-heavy roster in favor of, maybe bringing a little bit more home representation on this team?
I mean, you have to think that's one of the reasons that could be a possibility. It could be just that maybe Moon and Dongsu were close. That's how they meshed. And when Moon left, maybe Dongsu wasn't as happy, or maybe things just behind the scenes weren't working out quite what they expected them to be. So, there's hundreds of reasons why this couldn't have worked out. You could even look at Packing 10. Packing 10 and Dongsu were both assistant coaches. Packing 10 got lifted up. Maybe there's talks to make him full head coach, even though he's interim head coach right now. And maybe he didn't think Dongsu was a good fit for the team, or these kind of moves when a team is in the transition period, you could spend all day kind of speculating. But the one thing that really kind of stuck out to me is when they got rid of Moon, they did go on an uptick. So we don't know how much, Dongsu really played a role in after that. Like, obviously you would fully expect him to have some kind of impact the first stage that he's hired. Like you kind of want to make yourself look good, and then you go 0-10 or 0-7 at this point. And it just didn't work out. So I think maybe he just wasn't a good fit for the team. We've seen other coaches come by and say like, hey, this just wasn't the team for me, and then go to another team and work out much better. Like Krusty's doing right now with San Francisco Shock. So I don't think this is anything to worry about. I think Dongsu is a good coach, and I think he'll find a home. He'll probably, end up in another Overwatch League team, if not contenders team, definitely. I mean, Washington's going to be looking for coaches, especially like Korean focused coaches, moving forward. So I can't help but, feel optimistic that he's going to find something.
Yeah, and after the second stage, Valiant, they went 3-4. That puts them 3-11 overall, which is still 18th in the lead. And when you're kind of like looking at like the play-in tournament right now, which is the it's like the 8th or the 12th.
Mm-hmm.
All of those teams are basically at 7-7 at this point. So it's still going to be an uphill battle for the Valiant moving forward. I think it's probably a little too early to say definitively, like, hey, like, pack it in at this point.
Right.
But, when you're looking at some of the other teams that are, similar to their record, they do have the better map differential. And even, like, with the Charge, the Charge have 23 map wins to their name and have 2 more wins with matches overall. So
Right.
there's not that big of a jump even there. And that's a team that is 3 spots ahead of them right now. So there's a lot of room for Valiant to be able to move up, as long as they can start to string together a couple of wins. Now, it's still going to be an uphill battle. We'll have to take a look at their strength of schedule. But right now, things are looking better. And, I'm hoping that, I'm hoping that they just try to figure out what exactly they're going to do with the flex support role, because there are times when Karif has come in, and it seems like his like teamwork has been a little bit better on that role specifically. But I feel like the plateau with Izayaki and the skill ceiling is higher with him, but the ult management has kind of been all over the place, and it's a lot of shaky moments like that have kind of put him on the back burner, at least at this point for the Valiant.
Yeah, Izayaki is a solid like fragger. The problem is he kind of has Jonak syndrome a lot, where he'll require a lot of resources to get some return, and he's not providing the level of return that Jonak typically does. Like he'll be caught out of position. Like you said, he has some questionable ults to try to pull things back when they're already too far gone, and not every team can do that. We're not going to see a team like Vancouver or stuff where you can constantly win like 5v6s and stuff like that. So I think you're right. I think Izayaki at this point has the higher plateau, but I actually think Kariv is the better player for the team right now. He just, whenever he's out on that flex support role, they just look better. Like they look like a more cohesive unit. Like I talked about earlier, I think in stage 1, where I said they just had some fundamental problems. Like their timings were off. Like the core of GOATs was just off for them. Like the key moments, like shielding and trances and stuff like that. And while Kariv isn't providing the damage that Izayaki does, or the frag potential, he is providing either helping with shot calling or something, because them as a team just look more cohesive. Like the bubbles are coming when they need to, the trances are coming when they need to, discorded targets are dying more regularly, still not quite as much as you kind of need, but it's just better overall. So I think Izayaki is going to be one of those players that they're going to need to work a little more on. And all this could be not even a conversation if the meta shifts. Like Izayaki could be poised to be an amazing Zenyatta or a flex support in a different meta. It's just something about 3-3 just does not click with him.
Yeah, and it's weird too, because, kind of like looking back after that rough start, we kind of had the discussion of, well, will the Valiant be buyers during kind of like this mid-season break? And at this point, after this recent uptick, it's really made me second guess whether or not they're actually going to go out and try to pick up someone. I don't think they're going to be as aggressive now. We're starting to see them piece things together. And they did pick up a pretty big upset this past week against the Chengdu Hunters, which definitely surprised a lot of us. I know the pick rate in that match in particular was probably like 95-5 in favor of the Hunters. And of course, the Hunters were playing for their playoff spot. That didn't happen. But you know what? When they faltered, Shanghai Dragons were there to pick up the pieces. We got 2 representatives of China in the stage playoffs. Dragons were the first to clinch their spot, so, not only do the Dragons have a winning record for the first time, but they also clinched their first playoff berth, which is exciting to see. And, outside of that, we're nearing the All-Star game, so there's a lot of hype going on with that. And I know last week we kind of talked about, the vote-in being closed at this point, so we basically already knew who the starting lineup was going to be. They made it official, so just as a reminder, for the Atlantic Division, we have Pine, Carpe, Jonak, Arc, Poco, and Fusions. And then for the Pacific, we have Jinmu, Fleta, Yveltal, Ryuji-Han, Gushui, and Main. Ow. Of course, with Fleta and Pine, they haven't really been playing. I know Pine tweeted, like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Which was
I love
fantastic.
his tweet, like, huh?
So, of course, Pine basically got in because, he was an all-star this past season. And we have 6 of these 12 players returning from the starting lineup this last year. So that includes, Pine, Carpe, Jonak, Arc, Fleta, and Ryuji-Han. Now, when you're looking at this starting 12, there's no NA representation. We have 2 European players, 2 Chinese players, we have 6 Korean players, and, I had to say, like, you kind of look at this and you're like, well, there's no Shock players, no Titans at all.
Nope.
And of course, part of that is due to, the Chinese votes. There's no denying that. But
Yep.
we also know who the coaches for these lineups are going to be. And to no surprise, on one side, we have the New York Excelsior head coach, Pavane. And then for the Pacific side, we have the Vancouver Titans head coach, who used to coach for Fusion University. So really not much of a surprise in either case there. So at the end of the day, though, like, not knowing who these other pickups are going to be when the committees and the players, coaches, casters, analysts, all of those people vote for who's going to be filling out those reserve slots, who do you feel like is going to have the edge this year in the All-Star game?
I mean, I have to say Pacific, right? I mean, the most 2 dominant teams are on Pacific, and even if they aren't currently on the roster, some of them are going to be. So I can't help but to pick that. Atlantic has looked better. I mean, London has definitely turned things around, and there are other NYXL players that you can make a case for. But outside of that, Atlantic is still the weaker conference. I mean, it was kind of that way last year. We had like NYXL and maybe the Fusion, but London was so up and down. I mean, Fusion was still up and down, whereas Pacific was a little closer, especially in the last stage. So looking at these rosters, my pick would be Pacific, but the more I think about it, London has turned it around, but I guess it depends how serious they take it. Because especially with Amang on the roster, you could start to end up doing some crazy things. I can't imagine a world where we don't see Amang versus Bumper, Ryan v. Ryan in the All-Stars, just as like a little throwback to when Amang just dumpstered him the last time they played. Even though Vancouver won, everybody's pretty much in consensus that Amang outplayed Bumper on Reinhardt. So I would love to see. That's what I'm more interested in. Is I'm more interested in these like little 1v1 type of things, like Poco versus Janu and Carpe versus Simusu, or the little 1v1s that will pop up more so than the actual conference. Plus, there's a whole bunch of like coaching staff that could still be on there. I mean, you're missing Jane and Arrow, which are 2 popular coaches, so I can't see like how at least Arrow doesn't make it on, at least on the ticket, for the behind the scenes voting, and then you still have Bishop and Gumba on the other side that could still be voted in. So I think there's a lot of talent that we will see get voted in, that was somehow left to the wayside. But I am excited. Like, I was initially really hesitant on the All-Star Weekend being this early in the season, but I actually think this is going to be a good thing for the league, because it is going to provide an extended break. It's going to provide, kind of like a little bit of no stress fun. and it's going to create more storylines. Like you're going to have that, those 1v1s and stuff like that. So I'm slowly turning around on it being this early. And I'm looking forward to it. Like I voted, I will buy both of the skins. So, let All-Star Weekend start as soon as possible at this point.
Mm-hmm. So, with that being said, do you feel like Bumper is going to play DPS at all during the All-Star game? Because, after the Titans win, he was basically telling us, like, hey, just let me know who you want me to play, and, they'll hook it up. So, I don't think the Titans have, done a poll yet. I know they were planning on doing one on Twitter. So keep an eye on that.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to be an ongoing thing. Like, we're going to see Bumper expanding his hero pool. We'll see how long it takes him to finalize that one kill. But sure enough, that kill will happen.
It's inevitable.
But moving on, we also got some Grand Finals news in this last week. And it looks like the Overwatch League Grand Finals this year is heading to Philadelphia. So the finals are expected to be held at the Wells Fargo Center, which is operated by Comcast Spectacor, who own the Philadelphia Fusion. So, Spider, it's nice that at least Philadelphia can be involved in some capacity, with the Grand Finals, because, it's looking pretty rough for the Fusion right now.
Yeah, I mean, they were our number 2 team last year, and with their ups and downs, it's possible they could end up number 2 again. It's I'm not going to count anything out because they're definitely not out of the race yet. But you're absolutely right. It has looked rougher for them the last few weeks, and I'm just more excited that the finals just keep getting closer and closer to me. I mean, last year they were in New York, and unfortunately I couldn't go last year because it fell on my son's birthday, so that counted me out. But this year, nothing planned that weekend, so I am planning on going because it is literally like a 3-hour drive for me. And it's a nice arena. Like it's a bigger arena that they had last year by a couple thousand seats. So if you were at the Barclays Center last year, this is going to be even bigger. I don't know if they'll have DJ Khaled again, but I
doubt it.
I can't expect him to be there, but who knows? I mean, this is the same place the 76ers and the Flyers play, so you got to imagine that this is going to be a pretty hype place to see this happen. Comcast, because they are invested in Philadelphia, will make sure the infrastructure is there to support it. So I'm excited for this. If this is still rumors, like it's pretty much confirmed. It's like one of those things that's like 80-90% confirmed, but Blizzard hasn't officially said it yet. Like they haven't buy your tickets now at the Comcast Spectre Arena and stuff like that. They haven't done that yet. It was basically just something that came out via Slasher, via investor calls and all of that. So
yeah, posted on ESPN.
Right. So it's mostly confirmed, but it could still change. But either way, I am pumped that they are doing it on the East Coast again, because I probably will not make it to BlizzCon this year. So this will be the big to do for me in pro Overwatch this year.
Absolutely. And I know they put like a tentative date of it's end of September, and right. I remember looking at it, I was like, damn it, this is like a couple of days after I get back from Disney World. So it's like, well, that kind of rules.
Just wait and
out.
Fly a little north, man. That's all you gotta do.
There's just too many expensive. It's not like Disney World is a cheap trip at all. But who knows? I did enter the contest, that they're doing, that they've been chilling on the Overwatch League, Twitch stream.
Yep.
So fingers crossed. That'll be
Intel
probably the
I9.
only way. Yep, absolutely. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about some of the ongoing streaks that are currently happening in the Overwatch League. Let's start with the Vancouver Titans. So the Titans have broken the match win streak record in Overwatch League. And going back to the copy pasta about Runaway, not being Overwatch League caliber. Well, guys have won 17 straight matches. And there's a lot of discussion going on, especially with some of the stuff that's been going on with New York Excelsior, which we'll get into. The shock our streaking Titans haven't lost throughout the entirety of this season. So there's a lot of discussion boiling about who is the best team in the Overwatch League now. and all time at this point. Because there's a lot of cases to be said on both sides of the fence. And, that 17-game win streak does include the Sage playoffs, as, of course, Titans came out on top, defeating the Shock 4-3 in the Stage 1 finals. I'm really hoping we get to see a rematch because, honestly, that Stage finals was easily the best Overwatch League game that we have seen so far to date.
By far.
But looking at the Titans' path, they defeated 13 different teams already at this point. Now, New York is not one of those teams. They haven't gone up against a London Spitfire, but they picked up wins against Justice, Dragons, Charge, Shock, Valiant, Eternal, Hunters, Uprising, Dynasty, which happened a couple of times. Spark, Outlaws, Fuel, Defiant. A lot of the teams so far.
Mm-hmm.
And, you look back, and the prior record was held by Boston Uprising back when, they had that pretty massive win streak of their own, which was 14 straight games during the inaugural season. But it's so crazy to see, going back to the inaugural season, there was so much hype behind the Dynasty being, the Korean elite team.
Mm-hmm.
Runaway wasn't in yet, and then, Runaway gets picked up by Vancouver. And then there's these very lofty expectations. A lot of people saying, well, are they really this good? Knowing that they've been playing the current meta, which was a 3-3 for the past 6 months, when not everyone had been doing that. Then Titans just come in, and while they haven't forrowed everyone, Bumper likes to claim, they have been very dominant, and they haven't really shown too many weaknesses. Now, that being said, there have been some spots where we have seen these DPS-centric compositions really thrown them for a loop. There's been a couple of instances as well where, Bumper is either feeding or getting outplayed in the Rhine games. But at the end of the day, Titans have basically just run shot through everyone that has stood in their path, and they've really kind of dispelled this notion that the hype isn't justified at this point. No one can go around saying that the Titans aren't everything that they claim to be at this point, seeing how much that they have strung together. So, looking at this team, what do you think has been the biggest strength that they have had throughout the season so far?
Can I take the cop out and just say teamwork? Because, I always talk about how 3-3, specifically Zen 3-3, requires on, the stagger of cooldowns and the cycling of abilities and stuff like that. That's how you win fights. Vancouver just has it, so ingrained in themselves that they don't even think about it. If you go back and watch, certain maps and certain fights, they all play out almost the same way because Vancouver does the same thing every time. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but it's basically just speed boost, press W, cycle cooldowns, repeat till the map's over. That's it. That's a super ridiculous simplification, but they are so good at it that's literally what works. And that's the reason why they struggle with these DPS comps and rarely other team comps, is because that kind of throws a wrench in that. They're oh crap, we actually have to stop and think about it for a second. But then they get their bearings and just adjust and make the changes. So it's fun to watch. As a Runaway fan, it's fun to be okay, well now the Owl isn't Titans level. There is literally one other team in Overwatch League that I would consider a capable opponent for the Titans, and that's who we saw them play in the Stage 1 finals. I don't even consider NYXL a capable opponent at this point until they play. That may change, but who knows? NYXL could be the Atlanta to the NYXL to the Vancouver Titans. So think about it for a second, it'll make sense. But I don't see anybody else really standing up to them except for Dallas. No, I can't even finish that one. That's gonna be a quick game. So I think the only team that can stop this current record on this meta is the Shock. So I am absolutely thrilled for our boys in Runaway.
Absolutely. And speaking of the Shock have done something that no one has done in the Overwatch League, and that's have a golden stage. They did not drop a single map.
A single map.
Or draw. That's worth noting too. Because if they draw, that would have ruined the golden stage as well. But it's so crazy. And, you look at the infographic and just see the 4 O's all across the board. And, they swept Valiant, they swept the Charge twice this stage, Defiant, Spark, Fusion, Dragons, so granted, the strength of schedule has been kind of fairly easy. They do have the Spark and the Dragons, who are both playoff teams. Fusion, I expected a little bit more of a fight out of the Fusion, but, at this point, who even knows what Fusion are going to show up anymore? There are times when they look great, times where they look terrible, and there's just times where they don't even look like an Overwatch League caliber team, and, well, we all saw how that played out. It was another 4-0 in favor of the Shock, and, the Shock are looking to carry that momentum going into the Stage playoffs, where they are looking to redeem themselves after that crushing defeat in the Stage 1 finals to the Titans, and, as such a young team, knowing that taste of defeat and how hungry that leaves you, I want to see them kind of carry this through and seeing how far they can take this streak into the Stage playoffs. Now, that being said, it's not going to be an easy task because, with the strength of schedule, you're going to be facing the best teams at this point. So it's not going to be in easy roadblocks to get through at this point. But how far do you think the Shock can take this, golden stage into the Stage playoffs?
I think they'll make it to the finals. Even though they did have an easier strength of schedule, they had, they still had some mid-table, top 10 teams that they still played, and they won all 4 maps. That is the key. When we're talking about the Titans and stuff, we talk how good they are, how hard it is to beat them. The Shock are at a point now where they're not even dropping map 4s, and that's hard to do because most teams treat map 4s once they've already gone 3-0 as throwaways, and the Shock just refuse to do that. And the mental capability to do that is insane in almost any any sport, much less this one. So. Right. I have to give them credit for that. To go 7 games and not drop a single map is ridiculous. I don't expect that to ever happen again. We may see other perfect stages, stuff like that, but the fact that they could do this at all is phenomenal. And I kind of talked about them when I was talking about the Titans, but they are the I would almost say they are the best team in the league right now. You kind of have to give that to them. They didn't drop a single map. That may change based on head-to-head matchups and how the playoffs go. But at this very moment, the Shock are the best team in the league, and statistically, there's no way you can counter that argument. I am a little worried to see how they do stack up against better teams since they have played a little bit lesser teams, but I don't think that's going to be a problem because even in Stage 1, they looked good against, the quote unquote better teams. They may have lost a few more because they did have a tougher schedule Stage 1, but they still looked good. They just had a few exploitable weaknesses, and they fixed them. Every exploitable weakness that I saw in Stage 1 was gone by the Stage finals. So it was just 2 Titan level teams, the Titans and the Shock, facing off against each other. So awesome job by the Shock. I am happy to see this team succeed. And if they do beat the Titans in the finals, I won't be upset because they fully deserve it at this point. Yeah. And Edinar, you can suck it because I beat you in fantasy.
So looking at after we're halfway through the season so far, and the Shock are 11-3, which is very respectable, which does put them behind Titans, who are undefeated, and Excelsior, who have lost twice, both to the same team, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But the Shock have a plus 33 map differential right now, which is second best in the league, only behind the Titans, who are at plus 40 after the first half of the season. And, like, looking back, even dating back to the inaugural season, there was always, like, this wait-in period where we knew what pieces that the Shock had, and it was just a matter of, getting to the point where players were eligible to play on this team during that season. And going into, season 2, a lot of the community was really high on the Shock. We saw a lot of the moves that they were making, and they did have some of the bigger sign-ins during the offseason. I would say the Gladiators were probably the other team that really made some pretty big moves in their own right, getting Roar as, well, it's more so Decay than Roar, but, Roar has been an integral part of that team as well on that main tank position. But, the Shock still kind of had, like, that question mark position of, super, because there's a lot of concern about that main tank role on this team, but that team in particular just works so well around their main tank where it's just not even an issue. And, for a player like Rascal, who, has been on a couple of different teams, he's been playing in contenders as well, and maybe has been, labeled as, toxic in the past, to see him have this turnaround on this team has been really great to watch. And, we've gotten to see so much out of him so far with the Shock as well. And I love getting to see him flexing onto some other heroes that we just didn't get to see in his wheelhouse in the past. So, I would not be surprised if, we get that inevitable rematch between the Shock and the Titans, but there are a couple of teams out there that are going to be looking to play the spoiler, but, the Shock, I'm really hoping, like, if the Titans are going to lose to any team, chances are, at this point, it is going to be the Shock. They just have all of that momentum, and when you have, like, that confidence. The difference between the Titans and the Shock is, Titans are going to dick around at points with you, right? The Shock have not been like that at all. So when they're going for you, they're going in for the kill. And I feel like that's something that the Titans have been lacking a little bit. And I think part of that, too, is just the fact that Titans are basically speedrunning the Overwatch League at this point. They're taking the I'm 37 approach, trying to, beat everyone in 3 weeks, basically. Because that's how quick the matches have been.
see, the problem is, like, the Shock go in for the kill. The problem is the Titans go in for the kill. The problem is it's usually just Bumper, and then he dies, and then the rest of the team has to follow up and win that 5v6. So that's where the problem is. Like, if you get the whole Titan team in there, I think it would be a pretty good fight. But I said my piece on the Shock. Like, I think they're the only team that could beat the Titans at this point, for sure.
So, looking back at this past week, there was a lot of stuff going on. Now, I alluded to this conversation a little bit earlier, but we did have this grudge match between the Atlanta Reign and the New York Excelsior, and I know, last time Atlanta Reign did pick up the win against New York Excelsior, and, initially we're like, okay, they're gonna have a rematch. We're not going to go all in on either side as of yet until we see how the next one plays out, knowing that both sides are going to have more time to prep for the other team. And sure enough, Atlanta Reign defeated the New York Excelsior again. So 2 times in Stage 2, New York Excelsior's only losses in the group stage have come to the Atlanta Reign. That is not a statement I thought we would be saying right about now. Now, I will say this. There have been plenty of instances in the past, whether it's Overwatch League or sports, where, bad teams have a way of upsetting, some of the elite teams out there. We've even seen it in the Overwatch League. London finally picked up their first win against Houston Outlaws. That's a prime example, because Outlaws were another team that had been relatively bad. More so this season. I mean, oh my gosh, it's been a rough go. And I would say I feel bad for Meldarina, but it's the Outlaws, and I don't. It is what it is. But I was happy for Spitfire to finally get that monkey off their back. But man, Atlanta Reign. That was another one where it's like, should I tip Atlanta? And I gave New York the benefit of the doubt, and then I just felt like an idiot.
Well, I mean, when we talked about it the first time, I said, New York had a break coming up, and we'd have to have a very different discussion if this happened the second time around. Well, it's time to have that discussion, and it looks like the playoff New York team has reared its head a little early this stage, because that's what it looked like. Now, I will say that a lot of the problems New York had the first time, they fixed somewhat. Like the all usage was better. The problem was every map that Atlanta won, they exploited Jonak, because New York is still trying to play that style where if Jonak is in danger, you drop everything and try to save Jonak. And it didn't work. Like it just flat out didn't work. Like they would dump so many resources into keeping Jonak alive that the rest of Atlanta would be like, hey, cool, you used everything. Let's just kill you now. And that's literally what happened every time they won a map. New York had to fight and scrape for like every inch, every map win. It was closer because, like I said, they did fix some of their problems. But, at this point, you have to kind of look at New York's play style and see that all Atlanta really did was just exploit how they position and how they play. The best thing I can the best way I can describe it to you and point it out to you is go watch Atlanta's attack on Blizzard World, the first point, because they literally make the defending New York Excelsior try to attack the point by just maneuvering them around the map to the point where they're like, hey, New York's really good at defending, but they're okay at attacking. So let's just use that against them. And they bullied them off the point, and then New York couldn't do anything after that. And that's what they did to win maps. They basically pushed them out of position, bullied Jonak, and then New York had nothing to do with it. No answer to it, no nothing. And that's how Atlanta won. Like that was their game plan. Like, it's not rocket science. Sure, it's harder to do when you're actually in the game. Like, it's easier to make that analysis. But the point of that is other teams are going to see that and say, oh, okay, so we just have to practice that. And then it becomes an execution thing. And once you've kind of figure a team out and learn how to beat them, it puts a lot more pressure on that team to change things. And as we've seen in the past, New York is not the quickest to change things. I mean, they're still playing Protect Jonak, which doesn't really work in a GOATS meta. The only reason they haven't been, punished for that prior to this in most cases is most teams just didn't have the capability to do that. Whereas teams at this point do. Like they figured out GOATs enough that they can kind of move things around and stuff like that. So New York is in a bad position going into the playoffs. Like their secret has been figured out. Like teams are going to look at these two Atlanta wins and say, oh, okay, so let's just practice these comps. Let's just practice these positions. And then if New York does something different, then we will adjust. But until then, this is our game plan. And that's not a good place to go into the playoffs at. Like teams like Titans and stuff, teams haven't really figured out how to beat them consistently yet. Like you can say like, oh, sure, they have a weakness to DPS comps. They have stuff like that. But they've stopped those comps as well. It just takes them a little bit more effort. So whereas NYXL, they're kind of figured out at this point. Like it's up to the teams to exploit that. So going into the playoffs, I honestly don't expect New York to make it much further than they did last stage playoffs. So kind of sucks. But last week I kind of talked about their shortfalls and stuff like that, and this week I wanted to talk more about Atlanta's great play and like their positioning and how they bully Jonak and stuff like that. But that's really it. Like Dogman did good. Like he didn't bully Jonak to the level he did their prior matchup, but he did well. Daco came in and Daco looked like Daco. He looked good. Fried did not impress me again. So I think at this point you should just keep him off the roster. Like the one map they lost was when he was in there. So one of the maps at least. So Atlanta's kind of figured their side out. New York's got a lot of work to do, and they don't have a lot of time to do it. They have 1 week to do it in. So I'm interested, but I'm not optimistic for New York in the playoffs.
Yeah, the strange thing too is it's like when you're looking at both of these teams now, I have such a hard time to figure out where exactly do we place these teams, because Atlanta, at this point, they're still middle of the pack. They're 7-7 right now. I think like their map differential at this point is only like +2 or +3. And then you have New York, who are basically limping into the Stage 2 playoffs as a 5th seed, which is not something that any one of us would have imagined at this point. But of course, their only losses at this point haven't been to Atlanta, so it's just like, do you tilt Atlanta higher just due to the fact that they have that upset potential against one of the big 3 teams out there, or do you just drop New York Excelsior heavier because they have shown more blemishes or more holes in their armor here in recent weeks? Now, a lot of people are talking about the big 3, Titans, Excelsior, and Shock. And it seems like more and more people are basically saying, you know what, Excelsior, like, you're out. Like, you have...
Basically, yeah.
You have Tier 1, who are going to be the Titans and the Shock, and then Excelsior are either, like, 1.5, or, they're in kind of like the clump with, teams like the Gladiators and, like, right now, you'd probably say the Spitfire. Dallas is potentially in the discussion there as well, but it's crazy to see, just like, you would think with more time to prep, for this grudge match, knowing that, top seeding is at stake, to have that sort of performance, it's not what you want to see from New York Excelsior, and you still have that thought in the back of your mind, like, hey, like, we've had an issue in the stage playoffs. We have a habit of choking. You don't want to be putting yourselves in a position where, you're going into the stage playoffs already with that doubt in the back of your mind, knowing that you just literally tasted defeat from the same team twice, and that just derails your mindset going in. And, as that 5th seed, they are going to be facing a team that has shown a lot of improvements, who have looked very dominant. Decay for the Gladiators has been playing out of his mind. Roar hasn't been dying first in every team fight like it was earlier on when this team was still trying to, gain that sort of chemistry. And honestly, at this point, like, you can't even consider, like, Gladiators beating New York Excelsior an upset. And it's just, it's crazy to see just the amount of turnaround that we have kind of seen, at least in regards to the perception of where we're ranking teams right now, where New York Excelsior is starting to fall more and more out of the discussion at this point.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, it was always that big 3 discussion, whereas now, instead of the big 3, you have the big 2, and then you have the next level teams, which I don't even know if I'd put the Fuel in there yet. Like, they'd have to really impress me in the playoffs. As a Fuel fan, I mean, come on. I have to at least be optimistic, but I will also be realistic. Like, right now, to me, it looks like you've got the Tier 1, which is the Titans and the Shock. Then you have, the Tier 2 teams, which I would say is the Excelsior, the Spitfire, and Gladiators. And then you have, like, Tier 3, which is probably at the top, would be the Fuel, all the way down to, like, the mid-table teams. And then you just have, like, the bottom of the barrel, like the Florida, the Outlaws, and the Justice. So, that mid-level is very volatile. And I think, even the Fuel could fall at that point. But I don't think the Excelsior, unless they surprise me in the playoffs, should be in that big 3 discussion right now.
Now, by surprise, you mean actually win a match in the playoffs? Like,
right? Yeah, like they the way the Gladiators played last week didn't impress me either. So the Excelsior beating the Gladiators would just be as unsurprising as the Gladiators beating the Excelsior. Like that match could go either way very easily. But I'm kind of with you. Like my money's kind of on the Gladiators.
So another thing that we saw was, Boston Uprising had a very rocky week, and speaking of the Gladiators did fall to Boston Uprising, but then the Uprising go and lose to Washington Justice in a 5-map series. Now, I unfortunately missed that particular series, and when I saw the map score, I was like, wait, what? What the hell just happened? But Boston has been one of these teams who, I feel like they still kind of have that moniker of being the underdogs, even though they've been one of the streakier teams in the league. They have beaten some of the top teams as well, but they kind of like sneak up on you still, because when you look at this team, going into this season, we were always questioning, well, like, how good are Color Hex and Blase going to be? Contenders level DPS have been stepping into the Overwatch League for the first time, and I'm so happy that we've gotten to see Blase flex the Doomfist. Color Hex has been playing better, especially on the Zarya role, which was one of the weaknesses on this team prior. I know Fusion's had a really strange week. He was, from what I had been told, in that Justice series, he was definitely out of sorts. But Boston is another one of those teams that it's really hard to equate like how good this team is, because we've seen these moments of greatness from them, and then we start to see them regress every now and then. But I had to laugh at the fact that you had Kate Mitchell, who celebrated the win, basically injured herself, right? So she was like in the ER, and it just makes you think, like, wins come so far and few between that when you're Washington, you just go all out, and for them that means get an ice cream.
Yeah, I mean, Sleepy made a promise and he lived up to his promise. So good on him. I mean, I actually watched that game live. Living near DC, I kind of root for the home team like that. I'm still a Fuel fan, but I gotta at least root for DC, and there is not much to root for. But like I was sitting here during map 5, I'm like, oh, are they gonna do it? They're gonna do it. They're gonna do it. And like Lily was sitting on my lap watching it, and she's like, what are they doing? What are they gonna do? And I'm like, Washington's gonna win. And she's like, is that good? And I said, well, it's rare. And she goes, oh, go Washington. It was really funny because it just seems like Washington has like this we can't go 0-7 clause in their contract. So the last week they always pull out some crazy win, and it just happened to be Boston this time. So if we were betting, look when they play the Titans. Maybe they play Titans in week 7, and that would be like a monumental upset. But it was a strange game. Like, it was really weird. Like, Boston looked really good the first 2 maps, and Washington looked exceptionally bad the first 2 maps. Like, it wasn't like normal Washington bad. It was like Houston Outlaws Washington bad. Like, it was like the alts were all over the place. Like, the positioning was terrible. They weren't running like the comps that they needed. Like, it was very strange. Like, basically every mistake you could think of they were making, and they were making it blatantly obvious that they were making it. It was almost like they were throwing on purpose, but you could tell like they were just, something wasn't there. And then they went into halftime, and it was like the teams like brain swapped. Like, all of a sudden Boston's like, hey, our DPS comps and actual compositions that had been working, let's not do any of that. Let's just run 3-3 and we'll beat them. And they just, I don't know, like they just brain farted and forgot to play how 3-3, and that's how the second 3 maps went. Like, Washington looked better. Like, I still wouldn't say they looked great, but they looked functional at that point. And then they won in that last control map. I don't know, it was weird. Like, Washington just straight up bullied Fusions. So there has to be more to this story than we know about. But good for Washington. I mean, they picked up another win. I still don't think they're out of that bottom 3 tier, and I'm not going to rate the the uprising too hard on this one because something else seemed to be going on. Like it wasn't like, they got outplayed and they made a few errors. It was like calamity of errors, like clown fiesta bad, which you don't see versus teams do outside of the Outlaws on a regular basis. So good for Washington. Sucks for Boston to drop that map, but they'll come back next stage, and we'll get a better look at them.
So that Justice win did mean that we did not have 3 0-7 teams in this stage, but that honor went to the Florida Mayhem and the Houston Outlaws, who did finish winless in stage 2. All right, so there's been a lot of discussion about the Outlaws' decision making. Obviously we've seen them bringing in Jake full time again. He is their vocal leader on this team. They have looked better, I would say, in their 3-3. They've been running a more consistent roster in that regard. So, you have Spree coming in to play Zarya. Cool Matt has been in to play the Diva role. Dante's kind of been pushed aside, so he's not kind of like flexing between the Diva position as well as the Sombra. But at the end of the day, the Outlaws are still not able to secure these wins, and I have to say, like, at this point, if you're the Outlaws, I don't know if you just need to be like, just go straight to the coach, if you need to go to the parent company. Obviously, there's stuff going on where they're trying to sell the team, and I don't know, like, how that is affecting, like, the mentality of the organization from the top all the way down to the players. But at this point, like, it's so hard to just look at this team and just be like, it's so hard for me to, like, make an argument to say this team is not 19th or 20th in rankings at this point, because they just can't seem to piece everything together. Now, right. We have seen a little bit more experimentation here in the past, but at least now, at least with their 3-3, they seem to be running the same comp. But the problem with that is they have become too predictable. When Spree, Coolmat, and Muma are on the tank line, you know who everyone is going to play. When Linkzer's not getting subbed in, you pretty much know, hey, we don't have to worry about, the hit scan or running the mayor, anything like that, things that would slow down or try to just eat away the clock. And it just makes them so one-dimensional, so you know exactly how to approach this team. And, we basically seen, like, in the 3-3 meta, the Outlaws are not even a mid-table team. And that's why you see them finishing 0-7 in this stage. Now, overall, things aren't looking any better for the Outlaws, unfortunately for them. They did finish with the worst map differential in Stage 2, but right now, they are 3-11. Their map differential is one of the worst in the league. They are currently minus 23, which, looking at this, looks like that's like second or third to last at this point, but at 3-11, knowing what we have seen from the Outlaws, I feel like this is a complete opposite discussion from what we're saying about the Valiant. The Valiant have started to stream things together more and more, but the Outlaws at this point are kind of just like on this free fall path, and I don't think just going out and, picking up a free agent sign-in, if they're even able to do so based on everything going on with their parent company, is going to just be like this magic fix-it button at this point for this team. So it just kind of left me just scratching my head, like, what do you do if you're the Outlaws at this point? Because right now, there's this feeling of almost, like, hopelessness with this team, and as positive as Jake tries to be, and as vocal as he can be, they're just not able to win games outside of the competitive ladder. And that's not what you want to see from a team that, for most accounts, is still one of the more popular teams in the league, despite what their record shows.
Yeah, I mean, there's an old saying, "In the fish rots from the head down." So you have to look at the coaching staff. You have to look at the infrastructure behind it. And when you take a peek at that, disregarding like Flame and all his crazy comments, they have one of the smallest coaching staffs in the league at this point. Whereas last year they went in with one of the better coaching staffs in the league. Due to whatever is going on behind the scenes, they either can't make acquisitions or they won't make acquisitions. So this team really lacks the infrastructure behind it to make the needed changes that they unfortunately are going to need to make in order to be competitive. This season's almost a wash for them at this point. When you go 0-7 in a stage, you have to win out pretty much to just break even. That just means you have to go 7-0 to break even, which, unless you're the Titans, probably is not going to happen in a stage or the Shock. This team is in such a weird place. Like, if you haven't watched it, go watch the clip of Monty's musings that he did over the weekend, because I think that hit like the nail on the head. Like, you can look at individual players, you can look at short fallings, like people like to pick on Raucus and stuff like that. The problems with this team is so far beyond that. Like, you can't judge a player's skill at this point. Like, it's almost to that level. Like, you can say like Raucus isn't a great Zenyatta. You could say that, but you have to look at the coaching staff and say they are not getting the support they needed to put them in a position where they could be a great Zenyatta. And that's what this team really needs at this point. Like, I don't think they need a whole lot of talent acquisition. There are some key positions that they could fill. Like I've talked in the past, like they kind of need a diva, a flexible diva player that is competent. Like you said, like they're very one note, and Monty touches on it too. Like if you know Cool Matt's in, he's on diva. If you know Dante's in, he's probably going to be in the Sombra. Like it's like worst case scenario if he ends up back on the diva. And that's where the Outlaws are. Like they unfortunately are going to be stuck in this rut for the rest of the season, until their organization gets sold, all that stuff gets patched up, and it does look like we are nearing the end of that saga, because it looks like the Immortals franchise is poising themselves to buy it, because Noah has kind of removed himself from the LA Valiant. Immortals have kind of distanced themselves from there. They've kind of separated into their own organizations at this point, and Immortals are kind of gearing up to buy the Outlaws and make that like their next team. So if that happens, we could see things turn around for this team. We could see, coaching staffs move, stuff like that. I don't expect a whole lot of player movement just because we're so late in the season at this point. We're halfway through the season, and the window it's either closed or closing, right? It's almost over. So unfortunately, if you are an Outlaws fan, you just kind of have to stick with it at this point and say like, look, this is gonna suck, but when everything is said and done, hopefully we can move on from it. It's basically like you are hitting where Florida was, earlier in the season. The difference is Florida had the capability to make the moves, whereas Outlaws don't have that capability yet. And that is our other bottom of the barrel team, the Florida Mayhem, the Florida Outlaws. That would be. It's late here. Sorry. The Florida Mayhem is the other bottom of the barrel team, and they are on the upswing. Like their game against Dallas last week, they looked much more competent. They still have a lot of problems, but switching focus to this like all Korean roster seems to be the right choice for them. And I expect them to not be 0-7 going into stage 3. I don't think they're going to be an amazing team. Don't get me wrong. I'm not touting the stage 3 playoff Florida Mayhem. Crazier things have happened, but I don't expect that. But I do expect them to finish like 3-4, 2-5, something like that. They'll pick up a couple of wins. And if I look at their schedule a little more, I could probably tell you which wins those would most likely be. But Florida is on the uptick, whereas Houston is in this like kind of holding pattern at the moment. And Houston was. I'm not a big Houston fan, but I do like to see them succeed because they're kind of Team USA, and that was their monk year in season 1, and even though the Shock have kind of taken that as well in season 2. There's a lot of players on the Outlaws that I do root for. Like I like Linkser, I like Muma, I like Cool Matt. I like Dante. Like I like all their players, and I follow all of them and I watch them prior to the league. Like I want to see them succeed. So it kind of stinks that the infrastructure behind them is the reason that they're currently failing. But I don't think we should like start pointing fingers at the players yet. Like you can say like, okay, well, some of them make some dumb decisions and stuff like that, but that stuff can be coached. Like that stuff can be fixed. Like I think they have capable players, at least to not be an 0-7 team. So I feel bad for Outlaws fans. Like I would not want to be in Mel Arena's shoes. And now that I've said my piece for the Outlaws, I will go back to memeing the shit out of them because that is what we do here. So I got serious for a second, but I will start throwing them back under the bus pretty much starting now.
Just sub in Steffi at this point, get it over with.
You cowards.
But anyways, last up, let's talk a little bit about, that other playoff team that probably should have been in that didn't make the cut, that being the Chengdu Hunters, who failed to reach the playoffs despite having the easiest strength of schedule in Stage 2. Now, of course, the Valiant played the spoiler in this case. Shanghai Dragons did secure that first flat berth for that team. Hanju Spark being the 8th seed at this point. But, I know going into, this stage when we're kind of doing our predictions, Slambo and I definitely bet on the wrong horse for the Chinese teams. We both thought, Guangzhou Charge would be looking a little bit better. That was absolutely not the case. That was a fairly disappointing stage for the Charge. Not what we were quite expected. But you were the only one out of the three of us that were backing the Chengdu Hunters to be a playoff team. And sure enough, it turns out all three of us were wrong. Feels bad, man. But it's just one of those scenes. Like, when I was looking at the Stage 2 information, looking at the schedule, I was like, okay, Hunters have a very easy schedule. There's no possible way, like, they're not going to make it. Like, even when I was looking at that Valiant match going into this past week, I was like, winnable. Like, there's no way the Hunters aren't going to make it. And then, it was just a strange week of Overwatch League. A lot of things happened this week that really shook up the stage playoffs. And, like, I know when Edinar and I were talking about, like, who we thought was going to be making it, like, we were both thinking, like, okay, Hunters and, Hunters are going to be in. Dragons are basically out. Philadelphia was a definite no. But it's crazy to see how things just get shaken up going into that final week, to the point where, what do we know anymore? Because clearly things did not play out exactly how we thought, and it just comes to show, like, we always talk about that any given Sunday mentality of sports, and this past week definitely proved that in the Overwatch League. And, for the Chengdu Hunters, we got a lot of answers about this team. We had a lot of questions about how their DPS was going to fare. Now that we were either going to see more counters, whether it was Hitscan, other teams picking up McCree, or Widow, or, Soldier 76 in certain cases. How was Jinmu going to fare when there were other Pharahs ruling the sky? And, I have to say, like, Jinmu definitely held up his side of the bargain.
For sure.
But outside of that, though, it's kind of hard to gauge where this team is. Like, they're still kind of, like, in the middle of the pack, but it was just so unfortunate to see the way that they went down. But, credit to the Valiant for really taking the fight to them. And the Valiant just having played the spoilers and embossing kind of like collapsing last minute. It just comes to show, like, you cannot feel safe if you do not have one of the clinch spots going into that final week. Because not everyone had the luxury of having that position, as, going into the last week, we still had 3 of the 8 playoff spots still up in the air at that point.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I did peg Chengdu to make it to the playoffs because I did look at their schedule, and they did have an easier schedule. So I thought, they could squeak in, and they almost did. Like it literally came down to one map. Had they won that map 5 on in the game with the Valiant, they would have been in. But looking back at their schedule, they did have technically an easier schedule. Like they didn't play the Shock, they didn't play the Titans.
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm looking at it, the only games they typically lost were games, and I'm just double checking to make sure this is true. Games to teams that are in the playoffs. So they lost to the Dragons. They lost, outside of the Valiant, obviously. So outside of the Valiant, the teams that they lost to were in the playoffs. Like they lost to the Spark, they lost to the Dragons. So looking back, like on paper going into the stage, we thought they had an easier strength of schedule, but really they had like a middle of the road strength of schedule. So the fact that they ended up where they are, I guess just speaks that this is where they belong. Like they belong like middle of the road. And I think you nailed it. Like their DPS has still held up. They've encountered more problems and it's been a little more difficult to them, but you have to still look that they're doing what they do well to be a middle of the road team. Like they're still at 500. Like they you can't take away that win from London. Like that was a huge win. One of their other key losses came to the Gladiators, which is like I said, one of the upper teams. So I can't be too hard on them, especially when Dallas has been in the same spot where it literally comes down to one map. Like had they played that control map a little bit better, they would be in the playoffs. But because one of their losses came to Shanghai, I think it's fair that Shanghai made it over them. Like that's kind of just cosmic justice at that point. Like you even if it didn't go down to map differentials, like Shanghai would have won in because they won the head-to-head. And Chengdu has showed us more looks this stage. Like they've showed us that they can play the 3-3 when necessary, and while it isn't quite as amazing as their DPS comps, it is serviceable. Like it looks like a team that is 7-7. So this is right where Chengdu I think belongs right now. Like they haven't showed me that they should be any higher or they should be any lower. They're just the most exciting middle of the table team to watch right now. So I will look for them to do better. Unfortunately, they have a much tougher stage 3. Like their stage 3 is not great. So I don't think that I guess the best way I can say this, I will not bet on them making the stage 3 playoffs. And I made a mistake. They're not 7-7. They're 6-8, but still pretty much the same thing. Mid-level team. So yeah, I'm sad to not see them make it, but at least 2 of the Chinese teams made it, and I am exceptionally happy for the Dragons because that is like the feel good story. Until they get ran over by the Shock or whatever. Who do they play first? They play.
It's Shock versus the Dragons.
Yeah. So yeah. We'll see you in the Dallas waiting room, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, Shock already called the 4-0 in that post-game interview.
Dallas and Shanghai can catch up because they were the only scrim buddies in season 1. If you haven't heard that story, the only team that would scrim Dallas was Shanghai, and the only team that would scrim Shanghai was Dallas. So we will have a good drink together.
I mean, Chengdu may not be in the playoffs, but, they at least have half of the starting lineup for the Pacific All-Stars. You got to take your victories where you can get them.
Absolutely
all like steward votes aside because of, China. Damn, they're a fun team to watch.
They are.
All right, well, speaking of the playoffs, of course, we have the Stage 2 playoffs this week. A lot of good matches this week, and honestly, looking at these matches, out of every playoffs we have had, I am more excited about this current playoffs than I have been about the prior ones. We definitely have a more stacked field in this one. So looking over the lineup, the top seed, you had the San Francisco Shock. No surprise there, as, they had the Golden Sage not dropping a single map. They are going up against the Shanghai Dragons, which will be a rematch from this past week, which was Stage 2, Week 5, which, of course, went the Shock's way 4-0. Now, looking back, all time, the Shock currently are winning this series 5-0 against the Shanghai Dragons. I do not see that changing. But what I will say is, Shanghai, I really wish Shanghai had gotten all of the Kondu Panthera roster.
Mm-hmm.
Because even without some of those key pieces, they have turned their season around. Well, I mean, obviously, last season, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but everyone knows kind of how that season played off. And, a lot of us were, curious about, well, how good is this mostly KDP roster going to be? And while they haven't been as flashy or as dominant as their prior selves in, Contenders Korea, even without Roar and Decay, along with this core, this team, as soon as they got Gamzu, have looked completely different. They don't really run a lot of Diva, which is really unique. You don't really see teams doing that, so it's kind of weird seeing, where exactly they're fitting in regards to the current meta. But I feel like that gives them that own, distinct style. They're not always running, the triple DPS, Chengdu primarily is doing, and they have had that upset potential. But the problem is, they're going up against the Shock, who have just run shot through everyone this stage. Yeah. And, the Shock having that, Golden Sage, they get rewarded with the best seed, and that definitely shook things up quite a bit. So it's not the Titans getting the top seed, despite also being undefeated this stage. So, it's unfortunate for the Dragons. It's probably going to be an early exit for them. And, if you're the Shock, you're basically just gonna come in and look to do the same thing. They're going to look for that, well, I think it's 3-0 in this case, for the stage playoffs. So, pretty straightforward match there. We also have London Spitfire securing that second seed, because they did win their respective division, which, again, was not really a team that we had in the discussion at the start of this stage, so a really good turnaround for the Spitfire. A lot of improvements being shown from, Bird Green getting back into the rotation. Prophet has still kind of been the godsend for this team.
And my fantasy team.
Yeah. he's been an absolute unit. So you have London Spitfire going up against the Hangzhou Spark. Now, these teams have only played each other one time, and the Spitfire did win their last outing in the 3-1 victory, and this was back in Stage 1, week number 2. So, Hangzhou Spark had been kind of a rockier team, I would say, this season. We have seen, more of the emergence of Guxue. Ria's had a lot of up and down moments throughout this season, but we've seen a lot of cool things coming out from Crystal now that he's been seeing more playtime. So what do you think the Spark are going to need to do in this particular series to pull off this upset against London Spitfire, who have picked up so much momentum this stage?
They're going to need to pull out some of that good old Chinese cheese, because we saw when London played not Hangzhou, Chengdu, that they struggle when they're pushed out of their comfort zone. It's almost kind of they're like little NYXL at this point. I feel like London is a little bit better to adapt at this point, just because of some of their tools, but they do struggle when pushed out of their comfort zone. So the Spark are going to need to rely on Crystal and IDK to kind of push or boop the Spitfire out of their comfort zone, and that's going to be the only way the Spark are going to be able to win. Because I feel like if they try to straight up take London in a straight 3-3 fight, it's going to be very tough for them. Because London has looked much, much better in stage 2. Obviously, because they took top seeds in their division. So I I would like to say that this one's going to be closer than what most people think, but I still think London does have the edge. It's just going to really come down to those like individual plays, like certain members of the Spark, like I said, IDK and Crystal are really going to need to step up to really push the Spitfire, and just keep Prophet contained. Like Prophet, I don't know how he does it, but no matter who they put him on, he's just a destroyer. Like he just melts whatever you put in front of him, whether it's Brigida, whether it's Zarya, it doesn't matter at this point. This one's going to be good. Like this, I think this one could be very close.
I really hope that's the case, but it just seems like, Prophet at times just seems to transcend against literally everyone, so...
Yeah, I don't know how he does it, man.
It's crazy.
Like, there are certain weeks that I'll miss, like, a London game, and then I'll check my fantasy scores, and it's like, oh, Prophet had a 220-point game. I should probably go see what he does. And then he just literally runs around and is like, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead. I'm like, where is the shield? Oh, Prophet broke the shield too. Cool. Okay, so he is a monster, and he is the person that the Spark are going to have to control the most to even have a chance in this match.
Yeah, the only thing that I'm disheartened about is knowing we're very likely not going to get the match that I would really want to see, which would be, Spitfire versus the Gladiators, to see Decay going up against Prophet. We're probably not going to get that, just due to the way that the seeding does work with the reseeding after that first round. So, moving on, we have the 4 seed, which is the LA Gladiators, who will be going up against the 5th seed in the New York Excelsior. So, as we mentioned, Excelsior, a much lower seed than a lot of people would have expected. But, those 2 losses to Atlanta definitely hurt them, not just in seeding, but probably their pride as well. Because, you don't want to lose multiple games in the same stage as after being one of the more dominant teams in the group stage. I'm not going to say throughout the entirety of the league, because I don't feel like that is as true at this point. But the Gladiators, looking back, they are 1-2 against the New York Excelsior, and this is the first time that these teams will be playing this season. Now, I have to say, it seems like lately either all of the pressure has been put onto Jonek, but I know Mono was under a lot of pressure as well when New York Excelsior were facing the Atlanta Reign. And with the way the Gladiators have been protecting Roar better this stage, it's so hard to say that the Excelsior would have an edge in this series. I feel like Decay has just picked up so much of the weight off of the Gladiators, where he basically just is doing whatever needs to be done on this team. His Zarya has been exceptional. And, on the other side, you have Nene, and, you can look back at his whiffed grab in the last stage playoffs, which was... It is what it is, you make some plays, you don't make some plays. And, of course, the ones that you miss are going to be heavily criticized, but that matchup in particular, the Zarya v Zarya match, is so intriguing to me, knowing just how high their ceiling has been in both cases. And, the Shaz versus Jonek 1v1 is going to be interesting as well. Both of them have been fragging. I will say, though, in this 3-3 meta, Shaz has been the better Zenyatta player, whether it is in Fantasy, Overwatch League, or just overall in the game sense as well. So, for New York, can they protect Jonek? Are they going to try something different? Are they just going to try to run 3-3 against the Gladiators? But, the Gladiators, we've seen more looks from them, and, whether it is bunker, whether if it's them, running a little bit of projectile, they have shown plenty of different looks that we just quite haven't seen from New York Excelsior, and knowing how slow New York is to adapt, it really puts him in a bad spot in this particular series. So while I don't think this is going to be a one-sided affair for the Gladiators, I do expect this one to be the closest one out of these 4 quarterfinal matches. But, with the way that the Gladiators have been playing this stage, and, New York kind of looking a little bit confused and not knowing what to do at this point because, their go-to strat hasn't really been working. I find it really hard to have faith in that coaching staff knowing, history just seems to keep repeating itself, but, the blemishes keep becoming more apparent, and it's happening more often than we've seen in the past as well. So, I'm feeling the Gladiators in this one to even up the series throughout the Overwatch League history.
Yeah, I said a lot of my piece for this match earlier, so I'll keep this brief. I do think this one will be close, but I have to give the edge to the Gladiators because they do have those 2 Atlanta wins to go back and look at. So I think Gladiators will probably take this one, 3-1, but I don't expect it to be like a complete steamroll. Like I expect it to be at least competitive. You can't count Excelsior out because they have had some problems because they are still a good team. Like they're, I was really hard on them earlier because they kind of deserved it at this point, but they are a really good team. Like they are still a top 5 team. So you can't count them out. Like they could turn things around. They just have some glaring weaknesses that I think the Gladiators can exploit, and they don't have a whole lot of times to fix those weaknesses. So I'm saying Gladiators probably 3-1.
So last but not least, to wrap up that round of 8, we have the number 3 seed in the Vancouver Titans going up against the 6th seed in your Dallas Fuel.
Womp, womp, womp.
Okay, so these teams did play earlier this stage. This was stage 2, week 3, and Titans swept the Fuel 4-0. Well, you're not gonna have that score line because first to 3.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I guess it means your suffering will be a little bit quicker.
Mercy.
I don't think it's gonna be any less painful.
I will optimistically say Dallas will take a map. But yes, I am still most likely predicting a 3-0. Dallas, it depends on the actual map draw. Like I don't know what order the maps are in because there were a few maps that Dallas were competitive against the Titans. Like they got steamrolled, don't get me wrong, like it was 4-0, but there were a couple maps that were closer than that 4-0 tagline makes you believe. It's kind of like the Shanghai Dragons game versus the Shock last week. They got 4-0'd, but the Dragons made the Shock work for that 4-0. It wasn't like some of the previous matches this stage. So I could be optimistic and say Dallas will take a map and lose 3-1. But even as like a Dallas fan, there is like the best way I can put it is I've seen 14 million possible timelines, and there's only one where Dallas wins, and this ain't it, Chief. Like this, like it requires all of the Titans getting sick with like pneumonia in order for Dallas to actually make it through this. So yeah, I am optimistic but not hopeful.
So just as a reminder, with the playoffs, they do reseed after that first round. So going into the semifinals, you will have the highest remaining seed going up against the lowest remaining seed, and then the second highest going up against the second lowest. So, based off of how we're feeling, that would put, the Shock going up against the Gladiators, so that would be the 1 seed going up against the 4 seed, and then we would have the 2 seed of the London Spitfire going up against the Vancouver Titans. Now, that being said, I wouldn't be upset with Shock versus Gladiators compared to, Shock versus NYXL. Both are going to be good matches one way or the other. But that Spitfire Titans game is so intriguing to me because, you have the Spitfire who have basically shored up, a lot of the issues that they were dealing with in Season 1, being a very lopsided team in a sense that, there was a lot of fat around that team. They basically merged 2 rosters together. which, didn't really work out. And then, they let go of players. They, dropped down to 7 people on their roster. And they've just been a completely different entity since then. Now, it hasn't been, all, roses and sunshine for the Spitfire throughout, the entirety of the season so far. But, they've addressed their issues. Birdring got benched for a while. He's come back. He's looked better than ever. And, Titans have just been, in their own right, really the best team in the league. And, some people might argue they have been already the best team in the Overwatch League since the league's inception. Now, I will say, even as a Titans fan, I'm not going to make that claim unless they win this, stage playoffs. If they come out on top again, I feel like you could probably make a pretty strong claim for that argument.
They might be Al level at that point. They might be maybe.
Finally, after winning consecutive stages, they'll finally be Al level, and then we can redo the tiers at that point as well. But that would be a hype series. But at the end of the day, what do you feel like is a likelihood that we are going to get that rematch between the Shock and the Titans at the end of the Stage 2 playoffs?
99%. I always love to be super cocky and confident going into these stage playoffs and get completely blown away by the results like we did last stage, because we fully expected Excelsior and the Titans, and that's not what we got, but we got something way better. But this time, I don't know, the Shock didn't lose a map this stage. It's hard to see them losing to either of the teams that they have to face, any of the teams that they had to face. If you look at the possibility of who they're facing, there's not a team that I think could beat them hand over hand. There may be teams that could take a map off of them. I definitely think they could lose maps to these teams. I even think they could lose a map to the Dragons this time, just based off how the last game went, because there were a couple of close maps there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard for me not to envision another Shock Titan final, and I actually wouldn't be mad with whoever won. I'm gonna root for the Titans and our boys Runaway. I'm gonna root for Shock because they have turned things around. They look really good. They completed that perfect stage, so it's kind of, I don't want to say it's their right, because the Titans had a lost this stage. So at this point, if either team wins, good for them. Yay! But I think that conversation will definitely happen if the Titans win again. That they are the best team in Overwatch League's history. I think if the Shock win, then we're gonna have a different conversation. We're gonna have, are the Titans washed up? Because that's gonna be what Reddit deems.
Yeah, that'll be the Kotaku headline.
Yeah, exactly. No, they are not. But at that point, you start talking well, the Titans are really good, but they may not be the best team in Overwatch League's history. They're definitely up there. But it's kind of is this the era of the Shock now? Could the Shock continue this and become the best team? So it's going to be interesting, not just this weekend on how the games play out, but the conversations that are going to come from this weekend, because it's going to affect the rest of the season. We had the stage 1, and stage 1, everybody was oh, it's going to be Titans and Excelsior, and then the Shock were nope, we're going to show you what we really got. We've gotten much better, we fixed our problems, and then they took the Titans all the way to a map 7, and they played it really close until the Titans just were all right, hey, it's Rialto, let's just press W, and that was the end of the stage 1 playoffs. But this time around, I don't think it's going to be that easy for the Titans. So I am amped for the stage playoffs. I am with you. I think this is the most hyped I've been for stage playoffs in a long time. And the sad part is my team is in it and that's not even the reason I'm excited.
Right.
So like my team is in it, and that's like an afterthought. I'm like, oh yeah, and Dallas is there, just to be like, yay. But yeah, I mean, it's playoff time, and then we go on a big long break. So you got to make the most of it.
Yeah, Dallas is going to be there, and they're like, feels good, man. And then, it's going to be an early exit.
What? Indulge me for a minute. What kind of conversation are we going to have if Dallas does beat the Titans? That is going to be a fun. That is going to be a fun Monday. It's most likely not going to happen. Like I said, there is like almost no possibility that I see that realistically happening. But if it does, holy cow, that is going to be fun.
Well, I mean, if that happens, I will just chuckle if the Shock just go out and just sweep them right after. But how, like, the most bittersweet thing that could possibly happen, if we get that rematch from Stage 1, would be for the Titans to just roll right over the Shock and just sweep them.
This isn't even my final form.
Right, so, like, the Shock, they just roll through everyone, they have the Golden Sage. They 3-0 both of their first 2 matches, and then they just run into a brick wall that is the Titans and just get swept into the stage finals. That to me would be like the most fitting end to the stage 2 playoffs, but I'm not gonna say that's gonna happen, but like in the back of my mind, that is a thing I want to see more than anything. I want to see that happen just so they can kind of dispel that notion that like, yeah, Shock aren't on our level, despite, the meta being, not too different from what we saw in the Stage 1 playoffs. But with that being said, be sure to tune in. Don't forget, some of these matches are going to be on broadcast TV, so tune in, help with the TV ratings, show that, esports has a future on TV, all that good stuff. But with that being said, who are you expecting to come out on top when all is said and done? Are you going with the Titans, or do you feel like the Shock are going to come out on top?
I'm going to go with the Shock this time, just because I know you're going to say the Titans.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. 4-0.
4-0.
Bold prediction, 4-0. Just because I want to see that perfect record just completely washed away.
Yeah, that would be rough. But I'm gonna go with the Shock. I'm gonna say it's gonna go the distance again. I'm gonna say 4-3.
All right. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and close out the show for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, one of the best ways to do that is to go leave us a review over on iTunes or your podcast and app of choice. Whether it's Stitcher or whatever, like, they'll also pop up in our reviews. So any sort of feedback or constructive criticism is always welcomed, just because that will offer us insight on how we can make for a better listening experience for you guys. And with a little bit of a break, who even knows what to expect? We might have a little bit of shenanigans going on in the podcasts during those weeks, so stay tuned for more of that. If you would like to find additional Overwatch-related content, be sure to check out Overwatch Recall. There you can find basically all of the podcasts that cover Overwatch, Overwatch League, Path to Pro, Fantasy Overwatch League, which, spoilers, a lot of people are going to be complaining about map scores this week, especially at NR, so stay tuned for OWL by the numbers tomorrow night, as, we try to get Blizzard to fix their stuff. Because, yeah, feels bad, man, in the sets. But check out Overwatch Recall on our website, and also on Twitter at OW Recall. And, of course, if you guys want to show some additional support for our podcast and our podcast network as a whole, be sure to check out our Patreon page. We have tiers starting at just $1 a month, and more information can be found at patreon.com/OWL Network. So you too can join the likes of Blazing Bob, Brendan, and Gabby in helping our network grow. So I want to thank you guys again for your continued support. But Spider, seeing as, Slambo is off in Maui doing... I don't even know what you're doing, Maui. You're probably sipping umbrella drinks. I don't know, snorkeling?
You say you're welcome.
Ah. Yeah.
Solid Moana joke right there. Solid. It's not like I have kids and I've listened to that song a million times.
No, not at all. But who knows?
Yeah.
But anyways, why don't you go ahead and let our listeners know where they can get a hold of us over on social media and all of that good stuff.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at contact@owlnshow.com. If you'd like to check out our website is www.owlnshow.com. Twitter @OWLNShow. Check out our YouTube, youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. I got a Havana, kind of a more in-depth video in the works for whenever that launches. I don't expect that to be this week because they're still making iterations to the workshop. So, but keep an eye on that. Check out our YouTube. You can find all our shows and stuff there, plus all our other videos. If you'd like to talk to us live, you can do so at discord.me/OWLN show. We're always floating around there. You can kind of chat it up with us. If you're listening to the audio, you can watch us live and see our pretty faces on twitch.tv/OWLN show. We are a Twitch affiliate, so it's just another way you can help show, your support for the network, and you get a cool network emoticon, as you typically do when you subscribe to people. We have multiple stuff going on during the week. Our Overwatch League Focus show airs Monday night, which is what you're currently listening to. It is Overwatch League Network. It airs at 7 p.m. Pacific time. Tuesday night, we have our fantasy focus show, Overwatch League by the Numbers. That starts at 6 p.m. Pacific time, and you can hear Ed and R complain all about how he lost to me, and even if he would have got those maps back, he still would have lost to me. So it doesn't even matter. Wednesdays, we have our Variety Overwatch League show, our Variety Overwatch show. Sorry. They do talk about Overwatch League, but they talk about everything else too. That is Heroes Never Die. That is Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And then I typically do a host stream, Thursday nights around, 7 p.m. Pacific time, I guess. Got to do the conversion in my head. This week, I plan on doing some shenanigans 10 to 11. And then doing the thing I was talking about on the last stream, where I'm actually going to do some tank training for all you people. So if you want some educational stuff, that will be 11 to midnight Eastern. So was that 8 to 9, whatever. Time zones are hard. Totem streams whenever he can. I know this weekend will probably be pretty busy with the playoffs, so probably not going to stream this weekend, but during the break, I fully expect our streams to pick up a little bit more. So definitely check out twitch.tv/OWLN show. You can follow if you don't want to subscribe, and at least get notified when we go live. And as Toto mentioned, we do have our Patreon, patreon.com/OWL network. I'll get my Twitter out of the way just because I'm here. My Twitter is @SpiderGD. Slambo, you can say you're welcome at Slam Overwatch, and congratulate him, because that's a big milestone to be married to someone for as long as he was. I think he said 10 year, right?
I'm pretty sure it's 10 years.
So that I actually just hit my 10 year too, and we didn't go to Maui. Holy cow! I need to step it up. But what about you, Totem? Where can they find you?
Well, you can find me over on Twitter, mostly trolling Houston Outlaws fans, at Totally Drunk CTR, and again, like during the break in between, the stage playoffs, and the starting off stage 3, I would expect us to be streaming. I'm not gonna say like regularly, but compared to what we have been doing, it is gonna pick up quite a bit. So stay tuned for more information on that. We'll definitely be a little bit more active on social media whenever we are going live at that point. But I do want to thank everyone again for hanging out with us tonight for Overwatch League Network. This has been episode number 79. I've been your host, Totally Drunk, joined mostly every week. This is actually one of the first times we have an alternated host. Yeah. So that's something. We're making progress. Somewhat. Now
that the kids' schedules have calmed down and work has calmed down, I should be more consistent once again.
All right. But again, I was joined tonight by my co-host Spider, and we hope to see you guys back tomorrow night for our Fantasy Overwatch League podcast, OWL by the numbers, and if not, then we will see you back next week to discuss all of the fallout of the Stage 2 playoffs and talk Stage 3 storylines to keep an eye on, guys. Have a good night.
Night.